give you Damas.
Just set a timer so we don't go over. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Damis Arubai, and I am presenting my research on investigating academic predictors and retention rates among developmental mathematics students. Now, in the year 2020, the National Center for Education Statistics projected that college enrollment would increase by 29% between fall 2000 and fall 2029. Regardless of the statistics, students are not always prepared for college level work for the rigor that it presents. As a result, the Department of Education in 2017 stated that developmental education or remedial studies is a strategy to help students that are deemed underprepared or unprepared for the academic rigor of college level work. Developmental education serves a large student population. The National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education in 2010 stated that about 60% of first-year students are considered unprepared or underprepared for college level work and require remediation. Developmental math courses in particular are regular features of the higher education landscape. Durancic and Higby 2006 stated that close to 80% of first-time students at four-year public institutions took a developmental math course in the year 2000. Now, despite these large numbers of students taking developmental math courses, Bettinger and Long 2004 stated that students enrolled in a developmental math class are more likely to drop out of a four-year institution or transfer to a two-year college. They also stated that students who successfully complete a developmental math course are more likely to graduate from college with a bachelor's degree. This led them to conclude that success in developmental math has some relation with how well students do in college overall. Their sentiments are echoed by Benken et al. 2015, who stated that initial success in developmental math could mean success in college overall. Now, several motives undergird the reason for studies like this. Ethical and financial motives, for example. On the side of students, Jimenez et al. 2016 stated that students spend about $1.3 billion annually in out-of-pocket expenses taking remedial courses. Bailey et al. 2010 also stated that students bear psychological and opportunity costs of lost earnings as a result of taking developmental courses. Students can also exhaust their financial aid taking these courses. For higher education institutions, the negative financial effects of dropout make early indicators that let us know when students are at risk of dropout important. Now, this study has two purposes. The first one is to investigate predictors of academic success in a developmental math course. The second is to investigate whether there's a difference in retention rates among students who completed the developmental math course successfully and those who did not. My research questions are as follows. First, which of the following factors predict academic success in a developmental mathematics class? And the factors are classroom instructional strategy, academic major declaration, high school GPA, standardized test scores, college midterm math course grade, race, gender, social economic status, registration with disability services, lifestyle assessment score, the number of steps taken by fitness tracker in a Gen 150 Introduction to Whole Person Education course, and lastly, frequency of tutoring service use. My second research question is there a difference in retention rate among students who completed a developmental math course successfully and those who did not? This study has two hypotheses. The first null hypothesis is none of the following factors predict academic success. The first alternative hypothesis is at least one of the following factors predict academic success. The second null hypothesis is there is no difference in the retention rate among students who completed a developmental math course successfully and those who did not. The second alternative hypothesis is there is a difference in the retention rate among students who completed a developmental math course successfully and those who did not. Three theories undergird my study. The first one is Tinto's institutional departure model. Now, Tinto's institutional departure model is based on Durkheim's 1951 work, Suicide. Durkheim stated that suicide was a form of withdrawal from society, and Tinto 1975 likened student attrition to suicidal behavior because both are voluntary forms of withdrawal. Tinto 1993 argued that for students to persist in their studies, they need to be integrated academically and socially. The second theory I'll be looking at is Aston 1991's input, environment, and output or outcomes model. Aston stated that to evaluate outputs or outcomes, we need to look at inputs and the environment to which inputs are subjected. Inputs, for example, are characteristics or qualities or attributes of students, and environment could be policies, programs, faculty, or peers. The last theory I'll be using is constructivism, both social and cognitive. Lev Vygotsky's 1978 social constructivism emphasizes the social and cultural facet of activity, while Jean Piaget's 1985 cognitive constructivism emphasizes individual active cognitive reorganization. This study uses several key terms. The first one is academic success. I'm operationalizing this term as obtaining a C and above in a course grade, as a course grade as a term grade in a course. The second definition is developmental education, which are below college level, non-credit coursework aimed at teaching the academic skills necessary to succeed in college level coursework. The next definition is the flipped classroom, which is an instructional strategy that shifts lectures outside of class via electronic media and uses time in class for students to apply concepts with the help of an instructor or collaboratively with other peers. Next, we have peer tutoring, which is an approach in which one child instructs another, the former child being the expert, the second being the novice. Retention rate for the purpose of this study is freshman to sophomore retention rate. We'll be looking at the percentage of first-time, full-time students that are enrolled in university the following fall semester. And lastly, undeclared or undecided. These will be used interchangeably with other terms such as exploratory, general studies major, open option, pre-major, and undetermined, as Spite 2008 stated. Now, a review of literature on prediction studies shows that this is not a new area of inquiry. They actually originated in the 1900s and here in the state of Oklahoma. Smith, Trimble, and the Oklahoma Agricultural Medical College carried out the first study to determine chemistry students' grades by looking at their semester grade and their placement test scores. They found that it was only possible to predict the performance of the best and worst performing students. Prediction studies have also used non-academic predictors of success. Bagley 2015, for example, investigated the extent to which math mindset, prior math preparation, gender, core study habits, math-related anxiety, attitude towards mathematics, and experiences since high school relate to students' developmental math course grades and completion. Bagley's study found that math anxiety and Dweck's 2006 mindset were the most statistically significant predictors of successful completion in a developmental math course. Prediction studies have also combined academic and non-academic variables. Martinez, for example, examined 7 variables, including age, race, gender, and use of college support services. Martinez found that enrollment in introductory or intermediate algebra and successful completion of a university's college success course were the most significant predictors of success in a developmental math course. Prediction studies have used a grade as the dependent variable. In Moore's 2014 study, the dependent variable was measured by a student passing a remedial math course with a letter grade of D or above. Moore's study used age, gender, ethnicity, ACT composite, ACT math, and ACT English scores, financial aid, and enrollment status as predictor variables. And Moore found that ethnicity, ACT composite scores greater than 15, ACT math and English scores greater than 15 were significant predictors of success in completing college math and English with a D or above. And lastly, prediction studies have categorized variables into achievement, demographic, financial, social, psychological, and self-concept. For example, Orhovek's 2015 study. Now, the methodology for this study. This study is a quantitative study. Specifically, it's a prediction study. It uses ex post facto data and a causal comparative model. The participants are 241 first-time PAVE ORU MAT 099 students that attended in fall 2017, 2018, 2019, and spring 2018, 2019, and 2020. Now, data will be provided to me for this study, and it will be presented de-identified to ensure confidentiality and anonymity of the participants. Here are the following sources that will be approached to access data for this study. ORU's Computing and Math Department and the PAVE program will provide data on classroom instructional strategy and frequency of tutoring service use. Banner will be used to access data on high school GPA, standardized test scores, academic major declaration, midterm MAT 099 grade, number of steps tracked in Gen 150, lifestyle assessment score, race and gender. ORU Disability Services Office will provide data on registration with disability services. ORU Registrar's Office will provide social economic status data, end of term MAT 099 grade, and ORU's Institutional Effectiveness Office will provide data on returning students. Now, the methodology for this study. This study uses inferential statistics, which is a way in which we study samples and then make generalizations to the population from which samples are drawn. According to Alcar-Sonnet 2011, prediction studies use statistical analysis, and the statistical analysis used in this study is stepwise regression. I'll also be using the t-test, and for analyzing the data, I'll use statistical package for the social sciences, or SPSS. Now, stepwise regression aims to achieve the most parsimonious model by allowing researchers to add or remove predictors to a logistic regression model one at a time. A parsimonious model is the simplest model with the least amount of variables and assumptions and the greatest explanatory power. Variables will either be added or removed from a model based on their significance. And lastly, Moore's 2014 and Paliwal and Kumar's 2009 study showed the use of stepwise regression for academic performance forecasts. When it comes to the t-test, an independent samples t-test was selected to determine whether there was a statistically significant difference in retention rates among successful and underperforming students. A t-test is used to determine if two groups differ significantly at a particular confidence level. This study used an independent samples t-test because the group is independent in that they have no characteristics in common other than the population from which they are drawn. At this point, I am ready to take your questions.
It has come to my attention that we inadvertently left out a section in chapter 1 called limitations and assumptions. And I take responsibility for that. But now I would like for you to tell us the limitations and your assumptions of your study.
Right.
I apologize. I'm going to put everybody else online together.
Dr. Holzman, could you please repeat the question? We couldn't hear you at all.
I just got to make sure we have the sound up. Okay,
Thank you.
your volume control should be right there. Just a moment.
Okay, I'll start with my assumptions. This study used archival data, and a lot of this data is housed in departmental and student records here at ORU. And so one of my assumptions is that this data will be reliable, and this data will be accurate, and this data will be complete. Another one of my assumptions is that because frequency of tutoring service use is one of the variables that I'm investigating, students attending PAVE Study Hall swipe in and out to record how often they access the services there. And I'm assuming there'll be integrity on their part because they are essentially self-reporting on how often they access that service. And then as for limitations, the first one is that the generalizability of the study. I see a limitation in it to other institutions of higher learning because the variables are very unique to ORU. Like, for example, number of steps in a Fitbit. We may not find that in every other institution. Also, I am studying PAVE students and students taking MAT 099. There are other developmental education courses out there. So one limitation that I've identified is being able to generalize my study findings to other developmental courses. And lastly, the sample size, 241 students in an entire population of developmental math students is rather small. So I think that creates a limitation in as far as generalizing the study's findings are concerned.
In the past, you've worked with the PAVE program. So how are you going to bracket your bias?
Okay. Two ways that I've looked at bracketing my bias. The first one is I've stated in my study that I worked in PAVE Study Hall from October 2017 to December 2018. And another level of management is my study, every aspect of it from data analysis, data collection, and general putting the study together will be looked at by other individuals who are not conflicted.
Yeah, I have one more thought. So for the retention rate, so you have like a year-long retention rate, and I think you mentioned fall to fall, but then we have students entering in the spring. So the retention rate, are we going to make the fall and spring students, how many survive to the next fall? Or are we going to do fall to fall, spring to spring, or are we going to do it semester by semester?
Good question. Well, I was looking at freshman to sophomore retention rate. So spring to spring for those coming in the spring, and fall to fall for those coming in the fall.
Bonus on your variables. You talked about a flipped classroom. Is that strategy built in as one of the variables?
Correct. That's a unique feature of studying here at ORU. We have a flipped classroom in the fall and a regular face-to-face classroom in the spring. So this study will give a way to compare whether either instructional strategy has an impact on student success in Math 099.
On your first research question, if you can remind me what that is.
My first research question is, one of the following variables predicts academic success in a developmental math class, and I have the variables listed.
I'm trying to remember why I wrote this down. Maybe it had to do with successfully completing the class. And are we assuming then successfully completing means on the first try?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
What is your confidence level for your t-test? Your level of significance?
I would actually like to try 5% and maybe a little, maybe 10 as well, but I'm looking at 5 right now.
And what kind of t-test?
Independent samples.
So one of the things that you mentioned in your study is that the ALEKS PPL was used, but was it used for all the years that you were studying, or is that a relatively new process?
Well, I haven't looked into how far back ALEKS PPL goes. I'm looking for a placement test. My understanding is some sort of placement test is in place for Math 099, for placing Math 099 students. And the results of that will be used in this study.
So I guess, Dr. Lang, do they use ALEKS for placement in that as far back as 2017 or no? I don't think they did.
No, and it's been more of a gradual implementation as well. It hasn't been none to full implementation. We've gone through stages of implementation as well, actually. So at the beginning, I think we relied on admissions to decide whether a student was a bridge student or not. And then they would be placed in Math 099. But now with ALEKS, we determine who gets into Math 99. Good.
So that would be a way to distinguish between the two. Or
Mhm.
And I don't know if it made a difference or not, but I know that it wasn't used, I didn't think it was used back as far as your data collection.
Right.
So I thought that, that might be something to look at. The other thing that you mentioned in your study is that you're looking at how often students do go to tutoring or take advantage of tutoring services. You
Correct,
mentioned the math tutoring services as well as the paid tutoring services. So I
correct.
guess my question is, are you collecting data from both? And are you going to disaggregate that data, or are you kind of doing an aggregate attendance of whether they took advantage of either tutoring service?
Right. So this response is based on my experience with PAVE, although dated. I know the bridge students were required to attend a minimum of 2 hours per week. And sometimes we would have them attended in PAVE and other times in the math department. So I will be combining attendance from both departments.
Probably be worth mentioning that you're combining that.
and is there any way to discern which one they went to?
I think, yeah, they swipe in both is my understanding.
So that might be interesting.
Yeah, Dr. Hardy can generate reports of the Math Learning Center.
Right. Because if they just go to paid tutoring, that they never use the math center.
Right.
So I think that could be a thing we might want to try to look at coding to be sure that, because that could be a really big difference.
Although when they were going to paid, I know the math department often provided a tutor for paid for students that would math tutoring. So I don't know if that gets too messy trying to disaggregate which one they went to. If there was a math person that was provided by
That's
the
true
math
too.
department,
Yeah, because
that was providing that tutoring, so probably just, it would be,
That's true.
yeah.
That's true.
This kind of, this needs to be explained in the narrative.
Right. Mhm. So Dr. Lang kind of alluded to this in terms of the retention rate. I know that our paid students come in and they have a contract with which they sign, and if they, do well, they are able to continue. But I also know that that contract has been compromised. Sometimes the students who weren't really probably shouldn't have been retained and allowed to come back. So I don't know if there's any way to get at that information or not.
Okay.
And that, again, may be too specific and too messy to get at, but I'm just concerned that you might be looking at a false retention rate. Making an assumption that all students that were retained were successful. And so I just think that I'm asking the team really that supports you to
Okay.
think about how to get at that information.
It would seem,
That we can find that out by GPA.
I was gonna say by they passed the math class or not, right?
And then that cumulative GPA will determine whether they will be put on probation or not.
So they might continue with it.
Right, they might have a 2.1 and still be allowed to continue.
Or lower. And still be allowed to come back. So, right. I don't know how you parse that out or if you need to pay attention to that, but I just thought
We can refine
that
it.
could be interesting. I just want to tell you that you do very well with the study because I literally have been dreaming about how do we get at what we're doing with our students that come into the university, how we support them is so important. And I'm thrilled that you're looking at it by disaggregating the data by race and ethnicity and social evaluation that the provost is putting together, but we have been fighting what do we do with these students, and your research definitely plays to the reputation of the university. So it's, I want to, this to be razor sharp, and I know it will be because you are that type of person and you've got stellar committee members, but I think we're gonna make a case for this university about why we might even want to have at least an associate's degree for these students. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, yesterday when we did the run through, I said, okay, I'm ready for the results now.
Hurry up, get your results. Oh, that's the beauty of this, that it's all on file now.
Right.
The socioeconomic one, we've had trouble getting a hold of that, but we think we can do it, right? So that's gonna be a big factor.
We have a commitment from the former interim registrar that he would provide us with that information. So I'm hoping that will carry over to the new registrar.
I would think you just continue to pose it, well, Dr. Lang knows how important this study is going to be and how important that data is going to be. So I don't think they'll have problems pushing to get that data. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
impressed.
So, yeah, this is really interesting. I guess I'm just thinking, this is quite a laundry list of variables. So talk to us about all these variables and yeah, where do they all come from? Does it get just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah. So is that a good, did you have concerns?
Hmm.
Two things then. How did you arrive at these variables?
Right.
I know the short answer is the literature, but more than that. But did you consider dropping some of them? And does at some point do the stats and the interpretation just get unwieldy? You know, just like throw everything and see what works?
Right, those are good questions. You've answered one, which is the literature drove me to these variables, particularly Aston's research, you know, because he emphasized digging into an institution's dynamics. You can't just look at an outcome like an academic success and attribute that to just one variable. And we have several studies, like one that I'm citing, written by or co-authored by Dr. Lang, that emphasizes the relationship between physical activity and academic performance. And using Fitbits is unique to ORU. So initially I started out with 6, and then it went on to like 12. And your second question about dropping the variables, I think my statistical analysis, because I'm using stepwise regression, that sort of made me more comfortable with the number of variables, because what SPSS will do is I'll load in the data and it'll run different models and tell me, okay, this is the best path and this is the best model. And these are the best variables or the most statistically significant variables for this model that you're building. So yes.
When you look at other studies that
Yes.
use stepwise regression,
Yes.
is this common to have this many variables?
Well, I've seen 8, I've seen 10, and I've seen fewer.
Yeah.
So I did derive some sort of comfort from those with more variables, especially when I saw that they were also using stepwise regression.
I do think too, we're feeling a little better about, I'm feeling a little better about it now, because we do have 241 people.
Yeah.
You know, in the study, which helps.
There's another question is, as you noted, there is a lot of literature on this.
Correct.
And what is it about this particular setting What makes you think you can't already find the answer to your question? Let me say it this way. What makes you think this institution can't already find the answer to these questions in the literature?
So there are several variables that are not mentioned in the literature. Mentioned in the sense that, yes, we can see some correlation between academic performance, but not studied the way this research will study them. And definitely nothing in the ORU context has been done like this before. So I don't think we've had any studies on the Bridge program here at ORU, on PAVE, anything that takes into account how often students are accessing tutoring services, their social economics, their race, their standardized test scores, are they getting enough preparation before entering, the MAT 099 class? And it's just unique, I think, in as far as the variables are concerned. So the literature is fragmented. This sort of brings it together and says, this is what is going on here at ORU, and this is how it affects our MAT 099 students, and this can inform our decision-making going forward.
More, that's okay. And I think Dr. Boyd alluded to this. So you're looking at data from 2017 until now.
Correct.
So a lot has changed, a lot of difference in all kinds of things. Do you have any concerns about kind of the consistency of these environmental variables that Aspen, says are so important? It would be so much tighter if you had a big group and you could take one big snapshot. But I realize you can't do that. Did y'all talk about that? Do you have any concerns? Any ways to control that, like the ALEX, and these placement tests? Are they, really giving similar outcomes? And did you kind of wrestle with those things?
Absolutely. I think firstly, when COVID hit, I was concerned about the frequency of tutoring service use because we all went remote. Another area of concern for me was there's a lot of discussion about ACT and SAT scores. Colleges are no longer requiring them. There's a lot of debate on whether they are exacerbating inequalities for students, especially students of color and of low social economic status who are not able to afford to get to these test sites. So a lot of schools are suspending them. And although ALEX is new, I'm using standardized test scores, ACT and SAT specifically. So I'm not necessarily using the ALEX PPL test scores, but I did have concerns about that because there's a lot of debate going on, about the use of these tests going forward. And it's hard to balance between remaining true to your original research and to also incorporate the changing times that we're in. There's a lot of moving parts, and I'm having to lock it down on one thing, study that, and see what the future holds in terms of what those variables will look like in a few years' time.
Can I piggyback on this question because ALEX has been implemented, but was ALEX implemented and was the way that students do math. Now with ALEX, are any of your groups that you're studying, have they been exposed to the way that we're now using ALEX for math?
For instruction.
For instruction, yeah, because that's a huge difference in the way that we do instruction with the math courses now.
I think so, yes, I think some of them have, because Math 99 was one of the first areas where we implemented ALEX. I don't think it extends all the way back to 2017. I'd have to check with, but it's possible, actually. That's something I need to check. Get you the information about level of implementation and when it was implemented.
And again, I think that's
you.
something that we can code somehow to indicate when, whether it was used in teaching and in placement, or
interesting. So so your last set of data is fall 2020?
Spring,
Okay, so just as,
correct.
okay,
And then used for the students in the summer and then that fall.
interesting, yeah. Right.
Did you do like a preliminary, just t-test or something to compare achievement of these groups? Are there too many other variables going on, but just kind of to see if that data is usable that way?
You could hold the others constant and look at it, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you could do that. You could. Yeah,
One thing, at the end of that semester, that might affect things is faculty were encouraged to have grace, and then there were a lot of incomplete
Grace.
They were incomplete. And we actually looked in the Fitbit research group, we actually compared grades without COVID, and then fall 2020, we looked at grades where there was COVID on campus. And grades were actually higher. Grades were higher when there was COVID, and that was basically because of, when we looked at the distribution, it was kind of similar at the top, but during COVID, there was much fewer B's and F's. During COVID, more faculty would give them incompletes and W's.
Okay.
So the GPA during COVID was higher, but when we analyzed it, it was because faculty were more hesitant to fail students.
makes sense.
Interesting.
Yeah, the little things like that to look at with COVID.
What semester are you studying?
Fall 2017, 2018, and 2019, and spring 2018, 2019, and 2020.
Yeah, because they didn't come back after the spring break, right?
But
Transition.
the advantage is that typically the spring classes are smaller.
Right. There wouldn't be that many. No.
And we're only looking at first-time students in math 099.
Right.
And typically the spring would be those that are retaking
Or
and new students coming in.
So we may
And I
not.
don't think you admit paid students in the spring, do you?
I think there are a few that come
There are a
in.
few.
Maybe a handful. So it might-
So it might not skew the data because it's not a significant number.
Or we could consider running it with and without that last semester.
Right, right.
Dallas, I also think this is very interesting. I look forward to seeing the results of it as well. So this is good. I have a couple of questions and an observation. The first question kind of ties into what Dr. Hornby was asking about the variables and your comment about how it's unique to ORU. And so what is the title of your study?
Investigating academic success predictors and retention rates among developmental mathematics students.
As this is so focused exclusively on ORU, is that an appropriate title? Because that title speaks very broadly. Just something to think about. Does that title need to be narrowed a little bit to demonstrate that this is a study from ORU? I know you said it's generalizable, but just something to think about. Just something to think about. Okay. Next question. In your theoretical modeling, you mentioned Vygotsky and Piaget, but in both cases you cited Cobb. Why didn't you go to the original sources?
So I could not locate Piaget's 1985 work. Well, actually, what really happened was I did not cite Piaget or Vygotsky. I just put the dates when those theories were formed. So So that's what the dates in the parentheses are. It's not a reference to their works of this time. So I use just Cobb's literature.
Quick observation, right at the very beginning, in your background statement,
Yes.
you anchored the background statement is the foundation for the problem statement, which is the foundation for the purpose statement. So the background statement cites 2006 and then 2010 studies from the National Center for Educational Statistics. Well, my question would be, when it comes time for the defense, okay, well, that was like 15 years ago. Is it still a problem? Is this still relevant? And I'm sure there's material out there, but I would encourage you, you don't even have to take that out, just augment with something. Same thing with the statement of the problem. You have Bellinger and Lang at 04. Now you do augment it with Benkins 15, but by the time you defend this, that's going to be 6 or 7 years old. So you might want to freshen those citations just a little bit. That's what I've got. It's back at home last Sorry.
Dr. Cat?
Good questions. Good observations. Mute.
Thank you. Just a couple of thoughts. I don't know if there's bandwidth available for any kind of qualitative data, but I was curious because of the research that's come out of Johns Hopkins regarding students that have teachers who look like them. So my question, well, the study that came out of Johns Hopkins says for kids that have a teacher who looks like them by at least one, by the time they hit 3rd grade, their chances for enrolling in college goes up 13%. If they're able to have 2, their enrollment chances of enrolling goes up to 33% and 39% specifically for African-American male students. So I'm curious about the demographics of the tutors in PAVE. And then I'm just curious, I realize you're using archival data, but I was wondering if there's any interest or bandwidth about following up, maybe since you go back 4 years, to maybe some of those students who have graduated to get more specific information regarding their experiences in PAVE. Just curious. Thoughts that came to me. Thanks.
Interesting. I think we could get that data for the tutors, because it does keep those records of who was the tutor, and we could look up their records in Banner and get their demographic data. I think it'd also be interesting gender as well. That I know that has an effect with female students especially.
Okay. Good observations. More plus yesterday's one. 60.
Be interesting.
I think it would be interesting eventually to find out if any of these students graduated since you're starting in fall 2017. I know your retention is only from freshman and sophomore,
Right.
but you know, once they get out of the PAVE program, we see sometimes that they start struggling as well. And I'm just thinking, you don't have to do anything. You can just have admissions to say, are these different students graduated that started in 17? I don't know. I mean, some of the graduation rate is calculated by 6 years, even if they're still here. You know, and really, we could ask Dr. Stubbs to give us that information for us, just to see if even still here.
Okay.
Maybe graduating this year.
If they graduated this year, at least we know if they were still here or not.
Yeah, that might be a question, are they still enrolled at ORU?
But that can be something that Dr. Stubbs can get us out of. I'm thinking one more. 38 there, you go. One current subject.
Dr. Myers?
Yes, Dr. Holzman, thank you. And may I comment that it is so good to see our esteemed colleague from the math department. Appreciate Dr. Lang helping. That's great. Damas, a couple of questions, and I appreciated in your presentation that you referenced assumptions and limitations, because I didn't see that in the proposal. So I think that will be a needed addition to that. And I had another question for you, and that's relative to permission to use all of the data sources that you're talking about using. In your proposal, it seemed that you just referenced IRB approval, but I'm a little unclear as if IRB approval by itself permits you to access Banner, for example, or registrar's office data. So just, I think that may need clarification. Okay.
Okay, so we discussed this yesterday in my practice defense. I will not be accessing those systems directly, but data will be provided to me de-identified.
Okay, so you could just make reference to that then, that the university is going to provide
Correct.
de-identified data or something for the study, something like that.
Yes, sir.
All right. Damas, if you may, when you're ready, I'll have another one. When I looked at the proposal, the way you had it set up, for example, on page 42, it's kind of the research questions run right to the null hypotheses and then the research hypotheses. And you didn't break those out, or you didn't have any headers there. You broke it out a little bit more, I think, in your presentation today. And that might be a point of clarity in terms of moving forward with the dissertation, would be to make sure that a reader can, when he's in chapter 3, can clearly see, here's the research questions, here's the research hypothesis, and that we're testing the null hypothesis, and here is the null. And related to that, I appreciated the fact that you added in your presentation that on the steps, that it was via the fitness tracker. Because I'm sitting there trying to think, what are the steps in Gen 150? And so I'm thinking of, they do this first, they do this second. And so that clarification really helped me on that. And Damas, one more, if you would check for me. In chapter 3, a couple of times you make a hypothesis statement, and I think it's to your second research question. You do it on page 46 and you do it on page 51. And each time you say that, you say it a little bit differently. So it's like that. And I don't know that you need to say it 3 times. You might clarify that, especially when you set it up and introduce it the first time. You might make reference to the hypothesis, but I don't know that you need to restate it. And if you do need to restate it, it pretty much ought to be restated, in consistent language, because it takes on a little different take each time that we see that in chapter 3. Okay, Dr. Holzman, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
Variables.
Can I ask a quick question that is really just tangential? You said something just a little bit ago. So is ORU still pretty unique in collecting Fitbit data? Are we still there? So no one else has really picked up on it?
No, no. Other universities are tracking students more and more, and ORU is actually moving that direction. If you hear Mike Matthews And so several universities actually do track classroom attendance via technology like the mobile app. But no one's doing Fitbit, as far as we can tell.
Okay, because we've been doing that now for 5 years, 6 years.
Correct.
Yeah. All right, thank you, that's all. Thank you.
So unique.
Well, if there's nothing else, we will excuse Thomas and move into our deliberations.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
So we're recording, so I think we want to pause the recording, or maybe
Okay.
stop the recording at this point.
Yes.
Probably stop it entirely, I
This
think.
is usually where Jerry keeps running in, but.
Yes. Jerry?
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry.
Do we need to mute this, turn off the recording?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, that's
Okay.
what we were just talking about.
I'm sorry, okay.
That's funny.
I'm here.
Are there other?
So you mean totally leave? We're totally getting out of it, correct?
Yes, we-
Okay.